Very good. Welcome to Cooksofcrocushill, St. Paul, Grand Avenue location, and we are kind of in the front yard, I guess, for lack of a better term, and today's topic is going to be grilling. And my name is Chef Manny Krug, and I am one of the instructors at Cooks, and I'd like to take you through some grilling necessities. But before we start, I just want to say for a lot of you, you're probably taking your grill out of hibernation. Who knows what you're going to find in there. You want to make sure you clean out any leaves, hopefully no snow left in there. And then before we start grilling, we want to brush our grill with a nice heavy gauged wire grill brush. We've already done that. And then you have the option to either oil the grates with a towel with some nice high temperature oil, or we can oil the product. For extra insurance, you may oil the food as well as the surface, and then you're guaranteed no sticking. We're going to be cooking this afternoon using very high heat, direct heat. You can see our temperature gauge is up around 500-600 degrees, which is perfect for tender cuts of meat such as steaks, chicken breasts, pieces of fish, seafood, kebabs, etc. And we're also going to do some vegetables. There is one other item that I want to introduce, and that is the grill pan. And for many of you, if you want to do a stir-fry vegetable blend, or you want to do smaller vegetables or small sliced mushrooms, things like that, you may opt to use a grill pan, at which point you can put all those vegetables right on your grill on that pan. I will try in my demonstration to show you both direct cooking with vegetables as well as utilizing the grill pan. So we're going to start with vegetables, and the first thing we're going to have are some nice tri-colored peppers here. And you can certainly roast your peppers whole. A lot of times we'll do that if we're going to do large quantities. For the sake of today's demonstration, we're going to cut them. And when we cut those peppers, we want to go around that core. And then I usually save these ends and I'll dice those up for omelets for breakfast. But for grilling, I want nice, large pieces of peppers so that they don't slide through the grates of the grill. So we're actually going to fillet out that membrane and get rid of that. And then with these peppers, we are going to toss them in a little bit of olive oil with herbs and just grill them in their entirety. And I find that the red and yellow, and in this case orange bell peppers, have the nice, sweetest flavor for grilling. The green bell pepper, we can give a demonstration on just roasting an entire pepper. And literally you can just put them right on the grill. You don't necessarily need to oil them because we're going to peel the skin off of those peppers and use them possibly in a sauce, or put them in an antipasta salad or on a platter for roasted peppers. The asparagus have all been washed and trimmed and cleaned, and you can see they're very thin asparagus. So these would be a good candidate to do in the grill pan. We're going to take a little bit of nice quality extra virgin olive oil and just drizzle a little bit of oil on our peppers. And then we're going to hit them with a little bit of fresh ground black pepper. And a little bit of Maldon sea salt. Although usually I would just use kosher salt, and I'm actually going to save some of the Maldon for finishing. The sea salt is generally used more as the products come off of the grill. So for our asparagus, we're going to lay them parallel, obviously, to the grill grate so that they don't fall through. And we just want to put them on there. And depending upon the size and the thickness of the asparagus, they're not going to take very long at all. One thing to note is with a high temperature gas grill, most of the cooking is going to be done this afternoon with the grill lid covered. For those of you that are cooking with charcoal, you may want to take the lid off because the more oxygen, obviously, the fire gets, the more intense the heat gets. These asparagus will not take much more than about a minute or two. So I'm going to open up the kettle, the cover, and we're just going to roll them gently around and get a little char on them. Now you could see that these asparagus are early season and they're very, very thin, so they're not going to take very long at all. As a matter of fact, I would say another minute or so and these asparagus will be perfect. As the season gets later, as you move more towards the summer, you're going to find asparagus getting a little bit thicker. In that case, obviously, you need to cook them either a little bit longer, or in many instances, we'll blanch them prior to grilling them. And when we talk about blanching, it's a simple process of submerging them into boiling water for a very short period of time, taking them out, shocking them in ice cold water, and basically what that does is it shortens the amount. It's kind of a par cooking process that shortens the amount of time that they're ultimately going to take. So let's check on our asparagus and let's roll our pepper over. You can see we're getting some nice char on that green pepper. It's starting to blister. And our asparagus look just beautiful. Gonna give them maybe another minute or so at the most. And in the meantime, we'll take our tricolored, our red and orange peppers. And with these peppers, we're gonna put just a little olive oil, salt and pepper on them today. But if you had other vegetables, you know, grilling vegetables, things like zucchini, yellow squash, eggplant, portobello mushrooms, you could put them all together, hit them with a nice quality olive oil, maybe a little balsamic vinegar. If you'd like some fresh herbs, at the very least, some salt, some fresh ground black pepper, and go ahead and grill away, right? So let's get our asparagus off and then we'll put our other peppers on. Don't those look delicious? Nice, grill marks, a little bit of finishing sauce, a little Maldon. At this point, if you wanted to, you could reduce a little balsamic vinegar, just a little glaze. Sometimes I'll put a little fresh grated Parmesan cheese over them, let it melt right into your asparagus. And the beauty of these asparagus, they're great hot, they're great chilled as well. If you're having a dinner party and you want to do a chilled asparagus salad, or you want to wrap them with some prosciutto ham, any number of things you can do with these. If I have leftovers after a dinner party, I'll cut them up and throw them in with my scrambled eggs or make an omelet with them in the next morning. So there's our asparagus. We're going to take next our colored peppers. We're going to drizzle just a little bit of olive oil on. No need to have them swimming. We'll toss them lightly. Just a little bit of pepper. A little bit of salt. And once again, I didn't use a lot of the finishing salt, the Maldon. Normally in most kitchens you'd probably just get by with kosher or iodized salt. The Maldon is kind of a special salt that we like to use more to finish the items. So we've got our peppers ready. We've cleaned out the majority of the membranes. And we'll go ahead and lay our peppers on. And I like to put them skin side down. Get that good char. And you'll see that as they start to grill, they'll flatten out. And then really once they're nice and blistered on that skin side, we don't need to touch them off very long on the inside of the pepper at all. Our roasted green pepper, you can see, is starting to blister. He's just about ready to come off. Gives me enough time to prep our steaks. And then we'll have dinner or lunch. We've got two different cuts today. We've got a top sirloin and we have a New York, or sometimes what people call a strip, a New York strip. The top sirloin is probably one of the most economical, one of the most price-valued cuts out there. Very nice cut of meat, well marbled. The New York, it's a thin cut New York, so we want to be careful here. The one thing with grilling steaks is, if you're going to err to the rare. You can always put a steak back on the grill, but if I cook these mid-well or well done, and Will likes some medium rare, I can't bring it back. But if Will cuts into it and says, my friend, that's a little bloody for me, I can always put it back on the grill, but you're not going to be able to grill it back. So we're going to talk a little bit about degrees of doneness. The first thing, two things really to keep in mind: the thickness of the cut of meat and the temperature of your grill. Our grill is very hot, which is nice for tender cuts. We've got 600 plus degrees. That's why we try to minimize how often we open it, because we lose a lot of heat very quickly. As a matter of fact, we'll lose up to 25% of our heat if we keep that grill open for much more than a half a minute. So I'm going to oil and season these steaks, at which point our pepper should be done. Once again, just a real light drizzle of olive oil. You don't need to use much. We're going to oil the steaks, turn them over on the plate, capture any residual oil. And then we're going to season them. And this afternoon, I'm sure many of you have your favorite seasoning blends at home for steaks. We're actually going to use something that Cooks does sell, and it's Jacobson Company, and this is a Montreal type steak seasoning, and it's got a lot of different nice herbs, kosher salt, black pepper. So we're going to use a light application of this. And I'm a big black pepper fan, so I like aggressive amounts of black pepper. I hope you do. If you don't, then I guess I don't cook your steak. So we'll turn them over. And for a lot of you, I encourage you to try different types of rubs, try different types of seasoning blends. There's a lot of them out there. Find out what you like, what goes well with beef, what goes well with chicken, what might go well with fish and seafood. So these steaks are ready to go. They're well seasoned, they're oiled. We're going to check on our peppers here quickly. And you can see we're getting some nice char on those peppers. Isn't that beautiful? One thing I like to do, if you're going to grill vegetables, get a nice variety. People ask me a lot what vegetables are best suited to grilling. And for the most part, you can grill almost any vegetable. You can grill onions if you want to cut them into wedges. We talked earlier about zucchinis. We talked about yellow squash. We talked about eggplant. One thing I like to grill is fresh fennel. A lot of people, it's a little foreign to them, but fresh fennel is very nice, kind of anise, licorice flavor. Keep that core intact, cut wedges. Oil them just like we are the peppers. Portobello mushrooms, one of my favorite things. The texture, very meaty in terms of texture and flavor. The one thing with mushrooms in general, though, is you don't really want to salt them until you pull them off the grill. Otherwise, you draw way too much moisture out of them and they never get that nice char. And that char is what grilling is about, getting that nice Maillard effect within the meat, within the vegetables. And you'll see with our steaks. We're ready to go. So, when it comes to cooking steaks, there's no exact science outside of using a meat thermometer to check degree of doneness. I would say at best it's an educated guess. As I said earlier, if you're going to err to the rare. One of the best techniques that I learned was when you sear a side and turn it over and you start to see that side that's been seared bleeding through the top. For the most part, you're at rare moving towards mid-rare. So at that point, you should flip that piece of meat to seal in those juices. Once it starts to bleed through, technically on the second seared side, you're probably moving from medium rare towards rare. But I have to be honest that every piece of meat cooks a little differently. When I say every piece of meat, every type of steak, a ribeye different than a tenderloin, maybe different than a flank steak. For the most part, the meat that we're cooking today is cut what we call north and south on the animal. So the grains of meat are running, literally the juices want to run out. But if many of you have cooked a flank steak or a skirt steak, and the grain on that piece of meat literally runs east and west, so it's not going to bleed out like you see on a steak such as what we have today. So I'm going to turn or quarter these steaks. We've got nice grill marks. You see how easy they lift off the grill. You should never have to force your meat off of the grill. This is our roasted green bell pepper. And if you want to roast peppers in the future, you can roast many of them. We usually like to put them in some type of non-reactive bowl, either glass or stainless, cover them with saran wrap. And the heat, the combination of acidity and heat will blister the skins off the pepper. And then ultimately, those peppers can be eaten that way. In some instances, such as with poblano peppers, I like to puree them, use them in a sauce for different ethnic dishes. Obviously, with the chili peppers, we're thinking about Hispanic or Latino cuisine, right? Our other peppers can be served pretty much as is. And don't worry, you see some flaring, just move over. Not a big deal. People tend to get very nervous when grills flare up. Don't be nervous. When you're grilling, there's going to be fire, and for the most part, fire indicates flavor. These are the yellow and red bell peppers that we did, and I'm just going to kind of lay them around this platter. And obviously, if you were going to have a party, you might opt to cut them maybe a little bit smaller. You could do that prior to grilling, or you could do it after grilling once the peppers cool down to the touch. But this is just a beautiful combination of some nice vegetables. If you can imagine, some grilled mushrooms off to the side, maybe some fresh fennel that's been grilled. And one thing I really like to grill are potatoes. And usually I use the Yukon or the new potatoes, but that is a vegetable. We talked earlier about blanching, that you would need to partially cook in boiling water, maybe halfway, and let them cool down, slice them, cut them into wedges, toss them in that vinaigrette we discussed earlier, and then you can grill them like any of the other raw vegetables. These vegetables were all grilled from the raw state. We're gonna check in on our steaks. And you can see there's some juices starting to rise from that thin cut New York. So we're gonna take him off. He's gonna be done just a little bit ahead of the top sirloin. And the one thing with steaks is when you pull them, any cut of meat that you're gonna pull from the grill, ideally you wanna let it relax for a few minutes before you slice it. And the reason we allow a meat to relax is when heat's applied to a muscle, it tightens up and the juices run very freely. So by allowing this steak to sit for a few moments, in the case of a steak, maybe 2-3 minutes before we carve it, what happens is, yes, it's gonna cool down slightly, but as it cools down, it springs back and those juices get reabsorbed. It's not as critical with a steak as it is with a large cut of meat, something like a whole chicken or a turkey, or if we were doing a brisket or a pork loin, we might let that piece of meat relax anywhere from 10 to 20 minutes. If you're ever going to do a prime rib, for example, you might take it off and allow it to relax for up to a half an hour before you carve it. And what you have to think of is residual heat and carryover. So even though it's off the grill, that piece of meat is still going to cook for a few minutes even after removal. Not so much with an individual steak as with a large roast. And the same goes for oven cooking as well. Those of you that have cooked turkeys at Thanksgiving or chickens, you know you don't just take them out of the oven and start cutting them up. So I'm going to check on our top sirloin, and then I think we're ready to start having steak. This top sirloin right now is somewhere between about mid-rare to medium, and I can tell to some degree through experience, not to sound arrogant about it, the more you cook something, the more you do something, the more familiar you are. So I like a mid-rare to medium, and I think this steak is right around that point. I'm going to give it maybe another 20-30 seconds, and we'll pull it and let it relax. In the meantime, let's go check on our New York. So this would be something, obviously, depending upon what you're going to do with your guests, that each guest may get his or her own steak. A lot of times when I entertain, I'll buy larger, thicker cuts, and I'll slice them and bring them out on a platter and let people pick and choose what they want and how much they want. When slicing this steak, for the most part, I'm going to go on a slight angle. And you can see some of those juices are starting to track out of this steak. You'll probably see more of them as I cut more of the steak. And this is a nice mid-rare. And as far as presentation goes, I find a lot of times if you can keep the meat or the steak in its entirety, it's a nice way to present or pass to your guests. We'll take off our top sirloin. And we'll give him a chance to relax as well. And that's grilling in the backyard from Cooks of Crocus Hill on Grand Avenue. I'm Chef Manny. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope I don't look like too much of an idiot, to be honest with you. Thank you.